And have you found any data indicating whether corporate gifting overall is more profitable for you guys than the D2C, the direct to consumer sales?
It is for us, and that's because we've found a way to make it very scalable where we're really just changing the label. But because this is our core line, we have 6 products and all we're doing is changing the label. The actual cost to produce is not that different than anything else.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we have Julie Maskulka from Anecdote Candles joining us. And you can't really see because I'm covering, but if you're watching on YouTube, there is a candle burning in the background. It smells so good, smells just like fall. And Julie is here today to share about how corporate gifting as a strategy is accounting for about 25% of your total revenue at Anecdote this year. So before we get into the case study, Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you here. And I would love for you two to share your Cubicle to CEO story with us. So what was that final catalyst that, landed you in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, former consultant turned candle maker. That's my headline. I used to work in consulting, and my last job was at a design agency. Everyone had designer as a title. I was the business designer, which was the person who helped them figure out how to make money while everyone else was creative. On the side, Anecdote became this weird side project. I was getting migraine headaches, and there was a candle that was triggering one of them. So I still cannot quite explain the steps that took me there, but I went down a very interesting internet rabbit hole, learned all about candle making, and I just started tinkering with it. While I was doing that, I started, it was a bit of a walk down memory lane, this reminds me of the coffee shop I went to, or my Pilates class, or that one trip to Portland, and it slowly became just kind of this creative outlet of, what if I connect the two somehow? And so while I was working on it, I would say I still had a pretty demanding job, but it became this thing that I just kept tinkering with, and I knew I wanted to test it in some bigger way. So I did a trade show, and we got picked up by Nordstrom, Anthropologie, Macy's, Lucky Brand, all through that show. So I joked that it was my accidental business, but then it quickly became an oops business because we had to figure out how to ship the product. So I stumbled into it, but weirdly, I think suits me. So I'm happy to be a candle maker now.
I love that. Consultant to candle maker. That's a unique Cubicle to CEO story. That's a remarkable beginning, I think, to your business story. I mean, not every first year entrepreneur can say they were immediately picked up by household names like Nordstrom's and Macy's and whatnot. But from what I understand, Anecdote is now in 2,500 doors. So your business, you're selling in retail, you sell direct to consumer on your own website. And then with today's case study, we're really zoning in on your corporate gifting strategy. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, that accounts for about 25% of your revenue, which is absolutely significant. For our listeners who may not be as familiar with corporate gifting, can you kind of share with us why you felt corporate gifting was a unique opportunity for Anecdote, and especially, I guess, in the product vertical that you are? Why candles and corporate gifting?
Right. And candles are not a common corporate gifting thing, first of all. And so for one, there was just an opportunity from that perspective. But if you think of any corporate gift you've received, I get them from my accountant, from my dentist, from all sorts of people. It always has their logo on it. Mm-hmm. For us, from the very beginning, and how we had success in the retail market too, was that we tell a story. And it's very simple. It's on the label. But we tell a story that piques people's interest, and they feel seen by it, and they get it. So when we started getting inbound inquiries of, do you do custom? Well, maybe. And it became this very obvious opportunity for us to pursue because we already have a product. And, it's a great opportunity where we can just hone in on our value prop of making fragrance a conversation piece. And so our pitch to corporate gifting is, don't just put your logo on it because, everyone has enough tchotchkes in their apartment. But now you can elevate your brand with a scent and a story, and you can really make a statement piece for your customers or your prospects or your teachers or whoever the recipient is.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, being on the receiving end of a lot of different, types of gifting opportunities, I feel like we really need more functional gifts in that space, right? Nobody wants another branded pen, like you said, or whatever. There's so many tote bags out there. And I feel like having something that lives in your home and that you can see kind of on a daily basis, or that adds to the ambiance of your home, definitely makes a difference. I actually just want to show our listeners real quick who have never seen it. Here's an example of a candle. It says homebody, and I definitely identify as a homebody. So I love what it says. It says smells like invited and not going, which totally made me laugh when I saw that. But to your point, yeah, a great conversation starter piece. What gave you the idea to actually go out and like test this strategy though? Like, who were your first corporate clients? When did you see that opportunity actually present itself in the business, not just kind of as like a theoretical idea?
It was about 2 years ago. It was inbound inquiries. It was current customers or people who had seen the product. And the question was, hey, do you do custom? And the question or the answer to ourselves was, yes, sort of. And so we were slowly going back and forth. We had a very patient customer service person who, 40 emails later, we got to, okay, great, here's your label. That's not scalable, obviously, but it was a good way to learn, what are the boundaries we should create, what really matters to them. So if that was 2 years ago, then last year we tested it a bit more. It was still pretty lo-fi, but okay, now let's give people a menu. Let's make sure that we're really clear about what you can and cannot do. And, just give them kind of a coloring book. Like, yes, it's still going to be yours, but these are the things that are yours to create, and these are the fixed things. And that helped a lot to kind of, create something that we can build on.
So how did you decide on which aspects could be completely custom and which you needed to kind of keep more within a set menu in order to make the units work out for you in terms of scalability?
So, anyone who's made candles, like the hardest thing about making candles is if you change the container, it doesn't matter if you're using the same fragrance, you're going to have to go through wick testing from start to finish. You may have to change the fragrance. It's pretty technical. So that was one thing where that's not going to matter that much to the customer. We have enough sizes available. We aren't going to touch that. The other thing that I thought would matter to people is fragrance. So we gave them a menu. We started with around 12. And, it's when it's your own project, it's like, oh, but what if that one person wants, marine because they live by the ocean? And so
right.
you add one more in. Turns out that doesn't matter at all, which is funny because we sell fragrance. But when we did a survey with some of our customers, they came back and said, we asked them what was most important, and fragrance was ranked least out of all the things. And it's because they're giving it to 100, 1,000 people that they aren't going to please everyone. And so that was one thing we thought would matter, but didn't as much. So we keep it lower now. And then for us, what's the most easiest thing to change is obviously the label. So, and this isn't how all companies that do corporate gifting, but we will not do a pure private label of great, put your logo on it. Like, we still keep the Anecdote look and feel, but you get to write your own anecdote, and that's the real value prop of it. So that's where we gave people a lot of liberty of, okay, do you want to add your colors, change your logo? And that's really easy for us to do just from on the back end of how can we make that operational. So we just tested small and learned what really matters. Obviously to them, they want their brand to show up, and that's the easiest thing for us to make custom for them.
Right. So to my understanding then, these brands, like you said, they're getting to see their logo on the label. They're getting to come up with their own little quip, if you will, for that anecdote. They can change the colors to match their branding, but the typography of the actual text is still anecdote branding. And then the anecdote logo on the lid of the jar, you guys are still keeping that to make it, like you said, fully co-branded in a sense, right? It's an anecdote candle, but with their unique anecdote on it.
Right.
What is one of your favorite corporate made anecdotes that you've ever seen? I'm always curious.
Thought you were going to ask, so I actually pulled up some. Because, we've had all sorts. It's interesting, really, the types of clients that you can attract. We had a marketing agency that was doing a big event specifically for marketers and advertisers. So their candle was called Shift Happen. Smells like connected minds and disrupted paradigms.
Oh, I love that.
We also worked with a private jet company, and there's Blue Skies, smells like brisk air and boundless horizons.
Very, very nice. So obviously very different clientele and agency versus a private jet company. Let's talk about the kind of, because you really have a two-pronged approach, right? You can sell directly to these corporate clients. You can also sell through, let's say, distributors. If we talk about the direct sales side first, walk us through your process for identifying the key industries and partners that you think are really great fits for, this corporate gifting strategy. Because like I said, there's a huge difference between an agency and a private jet company. So what's the through line between, companies like that?
There is, for sure. It's someone who wants to tell a story, first of all, and has a point of view. And so sometimes it's not just the industry, it's also the use case. So if they're giving something to their clients, trying to catch their interest rather than maybe doing something internal, for example, that may be a better opportunity to pursue. But just in terms of industries with the actual through line, we we thought, like, this is where we had to do a lot of testing, and I had to go back on some of my assumptions. Like, I thought in the beginning realtors would be a great one. Like, you homes, and let's make it smell like chocolate chip cookies. But not. That was hard because it was very fragmented, and you have a lot of different people who only want 20 candles or throughout the year, and so that was harder. For us, what became really good industries were ones that were mission focused, had a point of view, and also, when I was going back to with use case, like they really wanted to connect with the recipient. Early on, one of our best industries, and still to this day, is just the education sector. If you think about anything from boarding schools to higher ed, they often need money, so they have donor gifts. They often need volunteers, and they're very grateful for that. They often need alumni, so they are great for that too. So they are connected to their community in a lot of different ways. The design industry is another one of those that, there are a lot of different players in that space. There's showrooms, there's architects and all sorts of vendors. Like, that's been an interesting one. And photographers too, because that was one that was really surprising, but they all work together and share ideas. So we able to kind of tap into that community and get a lot of referrals. Because again, if you think of like the use case, they really care about the recipient because there's such a high revenue attached to that person that they want to cultivate that relationship with them over time.
So real quick before I go back to some of these examples that you shared, because very interesting, I wanted to first have you expand on that initial point you made about how you thought real estate would be, a natural fit for this kind of gifting, and it ended up not being the right fit. From what I heard you say, some of it came down to like unit economics, like someone saying, oh, I only want, 20 candles. Was it just because of that, just like the sporadicness, I guess, of when they would need candles and for a small quantity? Or were there other factors that kind of played into why an obvious industry actually was not a good fit?
Yeah, and this was our story, so there may be a candle company out there who figured it out. But for us, what it was hard is because you're working with an individual, and that's their business. So even though they work with a brokerage, this is a person who runs their business a certain way. And so it wasn't just, the quantity, is the timing right? It was, oh, great, you can put my logo on it. I don't have a logo. And it's someone, if you also think of, yes, that's a very professional job to have, but they have their own personality in their identity in a lot of ways. So that also made it hard sometimes to make sure that we're sticking with the script of, okay, this is what you get to do. You can have a name, an anecdote, a scent, pick your colors. So it was just, for us, it just didn't make sense at that time when we were still trying to test out what the right market fit was.
Okay, that makes complete sense. So just like a lot more variables at play that kind of make it harder for it to be uniform, right? The example that I loved was the one you gave around education, especially higher ed. Like you said, that example of, okay, they have alumni that they want to reach, they have donors, they have volunteers. Do you find that with those types of clients, they are working with you year after year and just maybe swapping out the anecdote or, the look of the gift that they're creating? Or how does it look with some of those clients that have multiple communities that they're serving with these gifts?
Yeah, and that's the goal that they keep buying. And, I think sometimes for company or, for schools, let's just use them when they're trying to give gifts, there's a lot of pressure about we have to give them something new. We had a few schools say, oh, they want to know what the candle is this year. So if you can create it as great, this is, college so-and-so's annual candle. There's a bit of excitement there. We also have different sizes, and that was something that we actually did a few different events to connect with these schools. And so when they saw that, they're like, oh, great, I'm going to give this to the top donor, this to the middle, and this to the volunteers. And I know it sounds very obvious, but when it's right in front of them, that they can actually, move things around and say, oh, great, this is for that, this is for that. So we were able to nurture those relationships and help them think about, it's not just a one and done. How can you make it still exciting the year after?
That's actually really interesting. I would have never thought to kind of almost tier out gifts in that way, but it kind of does gamify it for the end consumer, right? It's like, oh, especially like the donor level, like, oh, I want to get the top donor level candle. It almost is like like an accolade or a trophy that you can kind of, right, wear as a badge of honor, or I guess put in your home as a badge of honor. So that's very, very interesting. I love that idea. And one thing that I've kind of observed about that example is it seems like the companies who, again, are very focused on fostering community or have established communities seem to be the ones that benefit a lot from a gifting strategy like this. One thing that I found really fascinating in the pre-interview research that we were collecting from you and your team is that you have gotten really good at identifying communities where sharing or even like copying each other in a good way, of course, comes more naturally. And you actually referenced them earlier. Photographers, you said, are a great fit for this. And that kind of made me wonder, okay, you said like real estate agents, for example, example, they're all individuals. They kind of all each have their unique personas. I would think the same of photographers. I would think you would maybe run into some of the same challenges there. So I guess what makes photographers, what have you observed makes them different and a better fit? And can you expand a little bit on what you mean by like these are industries where they naturally are good at like sharing or copying each other?
Mm-hmm. And this is, just from our perspective, but realtors, they are in competition with, they have their yard signs out there that so-and-so sold this home. Photographers, if you think of, a lot of them are independent, and there are a lot of communities of, even just online of great, help me with this client. We've worked with photographers and we've seen part of their social content is just how to run a business because they've built this network of creatives that they work with. So yeah, they may be competing with each other, but a lot of them too are, maybe they're in different geographies or they serve different industries, do different types of photography. Like they still kind of have their little piece of the puzzle that they all still are helping. I just think there is a lot more of a community mindset of, oh, can you help me figure this out? And a lot of them too, if you think of creatives who are now trying to run a business, I think that's something too where they lean into that community a bit more.
Right. No, that does make sense. Like you operate kind of more in that collaborative mindset. And I guess that makes sense too, because like in real estate, like typically you're either a commercial or residential and it's like one or the other. Whereas with photography, there's so many individual niches. You could be a wedding photographer, a newborn photographer, family, portrait, branding. So like there's so many more sub niches that I feel like it's a little bit easier to kind of refer out or find opportunities to kind of collaborate in that way. So that makes a lot of sense. At the beginning, you mentioned too that this whole gifting strategy really started because of that inbound demand that you were receiving. These days, are you spending a lot of time or staff resources on outbound pitching to corporate clients? And if so, can you kind of break down that process? Like who on staff at the corporate brand are you pitching? How do you find their contact? What's your initial outreach look like? And what are you proposing in that initial outreach?
And that's something we're still experimenting with. But, initially inbound, it was our current customer base. So we do a lot more proactive outbound reach to our customer base to say, by the way, yes, we do corporate. It's much more formalized now, but that's still our audience. Early on, we tried to do a lot more outbound. This was 2 years ago when we were piloting a lot of different parts of the program. And it was really hard because you have so many different industries. You actually don't know who the buyer is. It's not just title, it's function. So do they work in procurement? Do they work in marketing? Do they work in HR? It's hard. So we tried to actually tap into communities. So let's work with HR professionals and, connect with them. Going back to the schools examples, we did the same thing. We actually sponsored a big conference at a school, and there were, we were surrounded by ed tech platforms also displaying stuff, and then we were the fun candle company, and they came up. So we try to just take, are there really small moments where we can, not just send them a cold email that didn't work, but can we just tap into the right communities? And it's always going to be a bit of a gamble, but if we can try to just focus on the high value ones, have better potential. And then we'll probably get to it, but we actually do a lot more outbound through the distributors because they have that network that we don't always know how to, because they do know who's the procurement and the strategy and the marketing and the events and the HR at all the different companies, and they have that contact. So we aren't going to try to take that from them. We're going to try to, build that relationship with them to tap in from that perspective.
Can you share a little bit more about your distributor network? Like who are these distributors? How do you connect with them? And what does that relationship look like in terms of, what they're responsible for versus what you are? And I think for a lot of our listeners, maybe we've never, there's a lot of us who haven't worked with distributors before. So understanding even like the financial aspects, like what percentage is going to these distributors? Is there a fee to buy in to be part of a distributor network? Any insight you want to share there would be really helpful.
Yeah, of course. And the distributor network is new for us because when we were trying, I mentioned earlier, we were doing cold emails and it wasn't quite getting there. That's when I paused and said, okay, like what has worked for us in the past? And 5 years ago when the business was an accident, what worked was showing up at a trade show, letting people see our stuff. They got it and then they wanted it. So last year we did our first trade show. I didn't know much about distributors either, how it worked. And I'm I have two modes. I will either just jump in and figure it out later, or I'll pause and then reflect. And I've done both with this network. But our first trade show, we went to Vegas in January for 4 days and got about like 500 leads of distributors, gave them a bunch of samples. And that was really, it was a bit of like just information overload trying to figure out. But we slowly, the first, if you think at the very top of the funnel, we just first had to let them know we are here and we make candles. And then, it's a very old school and relationship based industry in a good way. So we had to really nurture those relationships. And then when we did outreach, it wasn't just, okay, great, here's an email blast. It's, can we talk for 20 minutes? What are you working on? Okay, let me give you some samples. You work with healthcare. Let me give you 5 healthcare mock-ups that you can take to your clients instead of just saying smells like, your brand and marketing plan, which is kind of our usual basis. So we've slowly had to figure out who the right distributors are because if you think about it, when you work with a distributor, they are selling our product to the customer. So we have a double sell in a way. They are selling all sorts of things to their customers. So we have to make sure that they're not just selling a candle, but selling a candle that makes a statement and isn't just going to be your logo. So we had to make sure that they got it too, because we didn't want to just turn into this promo company, which is what the distributor network is. And not in a bad way. It's just we did not want to pivot and just become this white label candle company. We wanted to stay true to who we were. And then on the economics of what you were asking before, the usual breakdown is we do it just by quantity. So it can be anywhere from 30 to 50%. And then it's a very interesting network. I always say I need a Rosetta Stone to understand all the different things of how it works, because they're used to like setup fees, but we don't have setup fees, or they ask for all different things. So we made our pricing really clean. We said, it's here you go. This is what it is by quantity, and shipping is included and no setup fees, because we just wanted to streamline it and make it really easy to get our product out there without having to go back and forth a lot of, okay, here's your quote and let's nickel and dime you on that and that.
Right. So just to clarify, these are promotional companies. They specialize in promotional products and gifts. And then they might have different like sectors that they specialize in, like you said, healthcare, for example. And you're not necessarily selling your products like, I'm trying to think, like in food and beverage, like when you work with a distributor, you're selling maybe wholesale to them and then they're selling at a markup to, I guess, another wholesale price to the bar or the grocery store. And then they're doing the final markup for the customer. So you're not doing that, but it's more so like based on whatever purchase orders their clients are making of Anecdote Candles, you are just giving a percentage commission to them based on volume. Is my understanding correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And it seems like trade shows then, like if any of our listeners have product-based businesses and want to get into corporate gifting, is that the best way to get in front of these distributors?
I think so. I think, that's their world. They see so many things all day. And for us, some people hated it because we didn't have a logo or we couldn't do the 10 things they wanted. But some people loved it because it was fresh and new. And you aren't going to get that immediate feedback unless you're there. And I think, it's also, if you think of just how many emails people get, like I turn things away all the time. It's simple. It takes a little bit of time, but I still think it's one of the best ways. At least you're going to get the highest return your first 1 or 2 trade shows that you do. But I still think it's just the easiest way to get your stuff out there. And then obviously what you do with that list of leads is up to you.
Right. And I'm assuming you still get the end customer's information because they have to work with you to like design their candle, or is that not true and you actually don't gain access to that information?
Correct. We don't. And it's the distributor's relationship. So kind of what I was alluding to before, if we have to sell to them to sell to their customer, and we want to be really respectful of that relationship and we don't want to interfere with that because we're selling your customer a candle today, but next week you may have to sell them t-shirts and we don't make t-shirts, and we want to make sure that they're still, positioned to serve that customer in any way that they need to.
Do you find that when you're just kind of evaluating opportunity cost for yourself here, do you feel like the increased volume and maybe new clientele that you get through distributors makes it worth it, even though you lose, let's say, other aspects like access to customer information for reselling and, reduced margins? Like, is the trade-off now that you're, a couple years into this, is it worth it? Or do you feel like in the future you may try to focus the majority of your efforts on just directly selling to corporate gifting clients without the aid of distributors?
I haven't decided that yet because I still think it is worth it. I think distributors, they just have access to so many more clients, the right clients. And those clients also, some of them have, this is my person who gives me all my swag for the big tech company I work at. Like they have that go-to person. Like we are not everyone's go-to person for candles yet. The other thing is because there are not a lot of candles out there, that if we can suddenly get put into all of their presentation decks, like we're just getting tapped in a lot more than I think we were able to do on our own. Specifically when I'm talking about making sure that we're being seen in front of the right audience, because we did spend a lot of time pitching and maybe people thought that was cool, but they didn't actually need a candle or a corporate gift. So distributors, They have people who need things. That's the easy way to run a business.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Even if, like you said, maybe candles aren't their gift of choice for that particular occasion, just the fact that you're included in the brand deck and, your level of awareness is being increased through this strategy, I think that alone, makes a ton of sense compared to, spending your marketing dollars maybe elsewhere to gain that same level of widespread saturation or awareness as a candle brand. I want to get into some of the metrics now because I know that's what, is really juicy for our listeners. And I'm so grateful that you were so transparent in sharing these with us. So your average order value for a corporate gifting client is $2,727.61. I love the specificity down to the penny. And the average number of items that come in a corporate gifting order is 176. Now, you did add a note here that your minimum order quantity is 48, but it was previously 96. And lowering that minimum order quantity actually helped you get more first-time orders. And then the customers would come back and reorder again. So I would love to understand, how did you nail down 48 as the magic number? If you started with that 96, what were the telltale signs that that number wasn't working for you, and why 48 specifically as the new MOQ?
We led with 96, so when we started corporate gifting, it's crazy. All we do is change the label. In the beginning, we outsourced the label printing. And for those who have a product business, when you do label printing, it's one of the few things where it's really a volume game. If you buy more, you will save more. And that's because when you're buying 100 labels, it still takes the same amount of time to put things on the press. So it's actually pretty expensive that we were paying almost the same amount on the label itself than we were for all of our other COGS. We looked at a ton of label providers, so that's just how it is. So we did 96 just from an economic standpoint. Everyone was asking for 48 though, and 96 really was a barrier. And so, because we were really trying to build this out, and first you just have to get customers, and then you can figure out how to, make the economics work for you a lot more long term. So that's why we then dropped it down to 48. We still sometimes get requests for smaller, and that's where it just feels like a little too much work for that low an order, but we still do offer that every once in a while to people, more just as a courtesy. But 96 was too much of a barrier, and 48 seemed appropriate if you think of a bulk order.
Yeah, no, for sure. This might be a metric that's too hard to just, think of off the top of your head, but do you remember when you made that switch over from 96 to 48, what percentage of previous no's just immediately converted just because of that reduced barrier to entry, or maybe even just what your overall closing rate increased by when you made that switch over?
I don't know the exact, and it's also because when we started, honestly, the first year we were not tracking all the metrics because we were just,
that's more than fair.
Yes, no, pass, fail, does this work? But I will say the first year when it was 96, that accounted for 1.5% of our revenue. And then the next year, and this was still pre-distributor, everything that we were trying to formalize. But when we at least had the menu, that in our total revenue, or it accounted for about 10% of our total revenue. So I can't say that, gave us that 8.5 point spread, but it definitely helped.
It's a significant player, right? So that, I think that correlation, what is that correlation, not causation. I know it's always hard to differentiate, but there's certainly some sort of connection or pattern there. Speaking of other patterns, your reorder rate is 15%, which is amazing. How do you retarget? Actually, I want to clarify here. Is that 15% your corporate gifting clients reordering more corporate gift packages, or is this 15% of the end user who actually receives that candle is coming back to your website for individual orders?
It's corporate gifting clients. We don't always know the end user, so it's corporate gifting.
How do you incentivize them to come back time and time again? Obviously, besides providing a great customer experience and a great product, but is there anything else that you specifically try to do as an initiative to really get them to reorder from you?
We've done a few things, and one I alluded to earlier, that we have tiered pricing, and one thing that we found is that sometimes people were right on the cusp of, okay, should I buy it now or let me wait? And we came out with something, okay, maybe they do need more candles later this year, but they can't buy them right now. So we offered warehousing, which is just a fancy term saying, if you commit to ordering 1,000 candles this year and you only need 200 at a time, we'll break those orders out for you, but you'll still get the same price as 1,000 units, even if you're ordering less. And again, because for us, the biggest variable price is just the packaging itself. So if we know that that's covered, then that's fine. We'll hedge it and make sure that we can pick that up. So that was one thing we did. We tried different incentives of, okay, let's start a referral program or things like that, but corporates are not always incentivized the same way that a D2C customer is of send this to your friend, because it's in some ways it's a transactional thing of, okay, I have this event and I need this thing. So we do also just kind of send some nudges of, hey, is it time again? And we've done some small promos here or there, but surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, just making sure that we can make it easy for them to get the best discount possible, whether that's through, warehousing, or we've offered drop shipping to different customers in different locations. Just the simple things like that to take that logistical load off of them has been the biggest incentive for them.
Yeah, warehousing, that's super interesting. That's the first time I'm learning a new term here.
I didn't know it either, but that's
yeah, no, it's really fascinating. It's almost like a payment plan, but for like product quantities, which is really interesting. So love that. Thank you for sharing that. You did mention though in some of your pre-submitted information prior to this interview that even though you don't always know who your end user is that is receiving that actual corporate gift or the candle from the corporate brand, sometimes you do find that some of these people who receive the candles come back to you to reorder more of that scent maybe that they received and loved. Do you find that to be just completely organic? Like someone, loves the candle and they just kind of look at the label and they Google Anecdote Candles and just end up back on your website? Or is there any sort of retargeting campaign for those people, especially if you don't know their information? I'm not sure how that would work, but just kind of curious if any part of this is like outbound or if it's all just inbound returns.
Not outbound yet, but we have explored it, and let's do another podcast next year and I will hopefully have a better answer, because we've, there's privacy concerns that we've thought about. So that's a bit of a challenge, but actually, so there's two parts to that. It is inbound, and that's one reason why, going back to earlier when I said we have a menu and we're really clear about what you can and cannot change. Even though people don't seem to care about the fragrance, some of them want to change the actual notes. So all of our candles they have two things. So it's, amber and citrus or whatever. And sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want it to say amber. I want it to say sandalwood. And so we won't change that. We say, no, this is an in-market fragrance. This is what they know about. That's a bit of a tangential, but coming back to your original question, it's all inbound. And the only way we can kind of track it, and we do this a lot with our retailer accounts too, is oftentimes people will search. They aren't searching for the fragrance. They're searching for the candle name and the anecdote. So they'll search, smells like private planes or whatever. And that's just enough to kind of know. And again, it's more a signal to the noise than a clear metric, but it's enough to know that like someone really cares enough to actually search for this on our site and get that information. So right now it's very low vibe. That's how we're doing it. And again, we're also still building this out, that we do want to be a little bit more formal and proactive in the future.
So what happens then, like that example that you just gave, when a customer comes to your website searching for that very specific anecdote? Obviously that one was connected to the private jet company. It's not a line that you publicly carry. And so if they want to reorder that exact anecdote and that exact scent and branding and everything, do you fulfill an order like that? Or would it not make sense because then it's just an individual now reordering like one or two candles?
So because we sold that product to, whether it was through a distributor or the corporate, like we aren't going to sell that exact product directly to the customer with their logo, just because that's part of the terms and it doesn't feel appropriate to like, yeah, here's another candle with someone's logo. And, it could be something that candles are probably I don't know the actual statistic on it, but I think they have a very high like regifting rate that they may have received it from someone else. So we don't do that, but we do have two things. We upload all of the anecdotes that people have created in the past. So if you type in, private planes, and that used our oak moss and citron fragrance, for example, it will populate that search result. And then we also do have a custom candle version on our website just for the D2C customers. So it will direct them there of, do you want to create your own? And it's, specifically for people who just want one candle. It's not going to have their logo, but they can, use the exact same fragrance and create it however they want.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And have you found any data indicating whether corporate gifting overall is more profitable for you guys than the D2C, the direct to consumer sales, whether it looks like, labor cost to actually fulfill the orders, or maybe even the cost of acquisition of a corporate client versus an end customer? Do you have any thoughts you want to share with our listeners on that piece?
Yes, it is for us. And that's because we've found a way to make it very scalable where, we're really just changing the label. We are not going through and, we do like a lot of custom with a lot of our retailers. And that's just a totally different game with the unit economics and the R&D behind that of going through the vessel design and new fragrance every time. But because this is our core line, we have 6 products and all we're doing is changing the label. It's a pretty, the actual cost to produce is not that different than anything else, if that. I mean, obviously, sometimes there are different requirements of they want it individually boxed or no cards. I mean, but that's also an add-on. And then customer acquisition. I mean, I will say the trade shows are a much bigger expense, but it's also you have to do that to show up and cast a big net. All about the follow-up. So that's something this year that we're thinking about. How can we, now that we have, this top of funnel, we think we have a good group of distributors, for example, how can we now go down a level, and are there different channels that we can tap in and nurture those relationships and convert those leads differently? So because it's a volume game, it does work out for us in our favor. The other thing is like the business started with retail and wholesale, and that's always been how we kind of know how to operate a business. Like, yes, we have a website and we do have a lot of customers, but we were never a pure D2C play. So the wholesale is something that we're used to, just in terms of how do we produce these large orders and do that efficiently.
Thank you. Super insightful. To wrap up this case study, then I guess I'll kind of follow up to that final point you made about, your origins being in retail and wholesale. Have you ever seen a use case where a corporate brand came to you and said, hey, we want to do this like custom candle, right? Using your normal corporate gifting channel, but instead of gifting it, let's say to our community, we actually want to sell it as like branded merch to our community. So they're not quite fitting in that category of like a retail shop that wants to maybe constantly stock these and become like a wholesale account, but maybe they want to do just like a limited edition merch drop for their community. Do you allow that use case? And if so, any details around that you want to share?
We've had a few, and sometimes it comes through like a PR agency, and it's hard because kind of what you're describing is it's not a pure brand collab, and that's usually what we would try to convert it to, because if it's going to be something that, you're also marketing, we want to be there with you on that. And then it may also change, the look and feel of the product, but we haven't encountered a lot. But where we do it is like if they're launching a new product and maybe they're doing it in their media kits, like that's actually a very common use case. So maybe it's not always selling on the website, but they're using it for all of their press kits. We've done that with musicians too, of let's announce this new release. If it were something where they want to sell it on the website, the economics may not work out too, because they need to add, a spread to that. So we haven't gotten there yet. And I do think if that came our way, we would actually try to like pitch it as, okay, if there's the right brand fit, that we'd want it to be more like a collab than just a great, here, buy this product and sell it.
That totally makes sense. Thank you so much, Julie, for just sharing with such transparency. I learned so much always being in this seat and getting to kind of peek behind the curtain of business models that are so different to what I operate day to day in my own business. So I know our listeners, especially those running product-based businesses, really appreciate it too. Where can our listeners continue to connect with you personally and or Anecdote Candles online?
Yeah, you can visit our website, anecdotecandles.com, Instagram too. Those are the two best places.
Perfect. And I believe you have a special 25% off code for our listeners as well, right? Can you share that with our people?
Yes, write it down so you don't forget. It's CEO.
Perfect. Easy to remember. So that code will be below in the show notes. Also, all the links that Julie mentioned will be below in the show notes. So go check out their website. It's so fun. Honestly, I spent an afternoon just reading through all of the anecdotes. It really is, especially if you're someone who likes witty humor. I think you'll really enjoy the different anecdotes that are on their candles. And Julie, thank you again for joining us. Thank you all for listening in, and we will catch you in next week's episode.